John Smith, a man whose bank account resembled the national debt of a small country, decided he needed a change of scenery. After years of grinding in the ruthless world of tech startups, where the only thing sharper than the algorithms were the elbows of his competitors, he'd finally cashed out. And what does one do with a Scrooge McDuck-sized pile of money? Why, buy an obscenely large mansion in the most aggressively manicured, utterly soulless, and notoriously HOA-controlled neighborhood he could find, of course. He envisioned a life of serene evenings on his expansive patio, sipping aged scotch and contemplating the meaning of existence, or, more likely, binge-watching obscure documentaries about competitive cheese sculpting. Little did he know, his tranquility was about to be held hostage by a woman whose superpower was passive-aggressive note-writing and whose reign of terror was known only as the HOA. Paradise Estates, the sign declared in tasteful, yet somehow threatening gold lettering. John chuckled. More like Purgatory Place, he thought, already sensing the oppressive weight of perfectly aligned hedges and uniformly colored mailboxes. His mansion, a testament to nouveau riche excess, was a glorious monstrosity of marble, glass, and vaguely classical architectural elements. It screamed, "I have more money than taste," exactly the impression John was hoping to make. He pulled into the circular driveway, the tires of his ridiculously expensive sports car crunching on the meticulously laid gravel. The first sign of trouble arrived not in the form of a flaming arrow or a swarm of locusts, but as a small, pastel-colored flyer tucked neatly under his windshield wiper. It read, "Welcome to Paradise Estates. Please be advised that all new residents are required to attend an orientation meeting with the Homeowners Association. Failure to comply will result in a fine, and we will find you." The flyer was signed with a single, ominous K. John crumpled it up and tossed it into the passenger seat, muttering, "Well, that's just lovely." The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige box of a building that exuded all the charm of a dentist's waiting room. John, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than some residents' cars, felt instantly out of place among the sea of khakis and sensible shoes. At the head of the room sat Karen Thompson, the self-appointed queen of Paradise Estates. She was a woman who clearly took her role as HOA president with the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice. Her hair was sculpted into a helmet of defiance against gravity. Her eyes were cold and calculating, and her lips were pursed in a perpetual state of disapproval. Beside her sat Dave, a timid man who looked like he'd been bullied since kindergarten, and was now reliving the experience as Karen's dutiful, yet visibly terrified, sidekick. "Welcome, Mr. Smith," Karen said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that barely masked the underlying venom. "We're so glad you could join us. I trust you've read the HOA guidelines? They're only, about the length of war and peace, but essential for maintaining the aesthetic integrity of our community." John managed a polite smile. "I glanced at them," he admitted, carefully omitting the part where he'd skimmed the first 3 pages before succumbing to the irresistible allure of a documentary about the mating rituals of the Peruvian tree frog. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Well, Mr. Smith, ignorance is no excuse. We take our regulations very seriously here in Paradise Estates. Very seriously indeed." She proceeded to launch into a mind-numbingly detailed presentation about the acceptable shades of beige for exterior trim, the maximum height of lawn grass, measured in millimeters, naturally, and the precise angle at which American flags must be displayed on holidays. John tried to pay attention, but his mind kept wandering. He imagined using his tech startup skills to disrupt the HOA industry, creating an AI-powered system that could automatically detect and punish violations, rendering Karen and her cronies obsolete. The thought brought a smile to his face. The meeting dragged on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Karen opened the floor for questions. John, eager to escape, raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Smith?" Karen asked, her tone suggesting that she already regretted this decision. "I was just wondering," John said innocently, "what the penalty is for, say, accidentally replacing all the perfectly manicured rose bushes with a herd of alpacas?" The room went silent. Karen's face turned a shade of red usually reserved for emergency brake lights. "Mr. Smith," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, "I assure you, that is not a laughing matter. We have very strict rules about livestock in Paradise Estates." "No alpacas, then?" John feigned disappointment. "What about miniature goats? They're quite charming, really." That was it. The dam had broken. Karen launched into a tirade about the importance of following the rules, the sanctity of the community, and the dangers of allowing uncultured newcomers to disrupt the delicate ecosystem of Paradise Estates. John leaned back in his chair, a sly smile playing on his lips. He knew he was pushing her buttons, and he was enjoying every minute of it. This wasn't just about lawn height and mailbox colors. This was about asserting his dominance, about letting Karen know that he wasn't going to be bullied by some petty tyrant in a floral print dress. As he left the meeting, he received his first official HOA violation notice, tucked securely under his windshield wiper once again. It cited disrespectful behavior during HOA meeting and excessive sarcasm. The fine, $500. Life in Paradise Estates, as John quickly discovered, was less paradise and more perpetual probation. The fines kept piling up faster than the leaves in his perfectly manicured yard, which, naturally, were the wrong shade of green according to Karen. There was the unauthorized architectural modification for installing a tasteful, in his opinion, gargoyle on his roof. Then came the noise violation for hosting a civilized cocktail party that allegedly disturbed the precious sleep of Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood busybody who could hear a pin drop from 3 blocks away. And who could forget the flagrant disregard for seasonal decor guidelines when he dared to display a slightly oversized inflatable Santa during the Christmas season. John, however, refused to be intimidated. He treated the HOA's petty tyranny as a personal challenge, a game of suburban chess where the stakes were his sanity and the reward was the sweet taste of victory. He fought back with the only weapon he knew, his wallet. He hired a team of lawyers to dissect every HOA rule, finding loopholes and inconsistencies that would make a seasoned tax evader blush. He turned every violation notice into a legal battle, dragging the HOA into endless meetings and costing them a fortune in legal fees. Karen, meanwhile, was apoplectic. John's defiance was a direct threat to her authority, and she wasn't about to let some nouveau riche tech bro undermine her carefully constructed empire of beige conformity. She doubled down on her efforts to harass him, sending him increasingly absurd violation notices and even resorting to spreading rumors about his suspicious activities and questionable character, which, to be fair, weren't entirely unfounded. One particularly memorable incident involved Karen accusing John of illegally breeding genetically modified squirrels in his backyard. The evidence? A blurry photo of a squirrel with a slightly bushy tail. John responded by hiring a professional squirrel whisperer to testify on the squirrel's behalf, claiming they were merely expressing their individuality. The HOA meeting that followed was a circus, complete with outraged residents, bewildered squirrels, and a very confused lawyer. The tension between John and Karen reached a fever pitch. You could practically see the sparks flying whenever they were in the same room. The other residents of Paradise Estates, initially amused by the escalating feud, started to feel the heat. They knew that sooner or later something had to give, and give it did in a blaze of glory. One fateful night, John was out of town on a business trip. He received a frantic phone call from his security company. "Sir, there's a fire at your residence. The entire mansion is engulfed in flames." John's heart sank. He raced back to Paradise Estates, arriving to find his dream home reduced to a smoldering pile of ash and rubble. Fire trucks were still hosing down the wreckage, and a crowd of neighbors stood by, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. As he surveyed the scene, John felt a surge of emotions: grief, anger, and a burning desire for revenge. He knew, deep down, that this wasn't just an accident. Someone had deliberately set his house on fire. But who? The police investigation was inconclusive. The fire was ruled an accidental electrical malfunction, a convenient explanation that satisfied everyone except John. He knew that Karen was behind it. He could feel it in his bones. He remembered the countless times she had threatened him, the way her eyes had gleamed with barely suppressed rage. He remembered the creepy smile she had given him at the last HOA meeting, a smile that seemed to say, "You haven't seen the last of me." But how could he prove it? He needed evidence, something concrete that would tie Karen to the crime. He hired a private investigator, a grizzled veteran named Max who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a noir film. Max was expensive, but he was also the best. Days turned into weeks, and Max worked tirelessly, interviewing neighbors, poring over security footage, and digging up dirt on Karen's past. Finally, he came back with a breakthrough. He had found a witness, a disgruntled former employee of Karen's, who claimed that Karen had confessed to the arson in a drunken rage. The witness, a timid woman named Brenda, was terrified of Karen, but she was willing to testify if John could guarantee her safety. John agreed without hesitation. He knew that this was his chance to finally bring Karen to justice. But before he could go to the police, he decided to confront Karen himself. He wanted to see the look on her face when she realized that her reign of terror was over. He drove to her house, his heart pounding with anticipation. He found her in her garden, tending to her prized roses. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "John," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What are you doing here?" "I know you did it, Karen," John said, his voice cold and hard. "I know you burned down my house." Karen's eyes widened, but she didn't deny it. "You deserved it," she hissed. "You came here and disrupted our community. You challenged my authority. You had to be taught a lesson." "A lesson?" John scoffed. "You tried to kill me, Karen. You could have killed me." "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to scare you." "Scare me?" John repeated, his voice rising. "You destroyed my home. You turned my life upside down. And you call that scaring me?" He took a step closer to her, his eyes burning with rage. "You're going to pay for this, Karen," he said. "You're going to pay dearly." Karen backed away, her face contorted with fear. "What are you going to do?" she asked. John smiled, a chilling smile that sent shivers down her spine. "I'm going to buy the HOA, Karen," he said. "And then I'm going to evict you, and everyone else who supports you." Karen gasped. "You can't do that," she cried. "Oh, but I can," John said. "And I will. You messed with the wrong tech mogul, Karen. This isn't over. This is just the beginning." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Karen standing in her garden, trembling with fear. He knew that he had a long and difficult road ahead of him, but he was determined to get his revenge. And he wouldn't rest until Karen Thompson was brought to her knees. John, fueled by righteous fury and a healthy dose of schadenfreude, wasted no time in enacting his plan to acquire the HOA. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The residents of Paradise Estates were a tight-knit bunch, fiercely loyal to Karen and her brand of meticulously enforced mediocrity. But John had something they didn't: a Scrooge McDuck-sized pile of cash and a burning desire for vengeance. His first step was to assemble a team. He already had Max, the grizzled private investigator who looked like he'd seen more shady deals than a Wall Street banker. Now, he needed someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of real estate law and HOA regulations. Enter Emily Carter, a young, whip-smart lawyer who possessed the rare combination of legal brilliance and a genuine disdain for bureaucracy. Emily was initially hesitant to get involved. She had dreams of saving the world, not helping a rich guy exact revenge on his HOA. But John, with his charm, his sob story, and his promise of unlimited funding for future pro bono cases, eventually won her over. "Okay, John," Emily said, after reviewing the HOA bylaws with a look of utter bewilderment. "This is insane. These regulations are more complex than the tax code. But I think we can work with it." Their strategy was simple, yet diabolically effective. John would buy up as many houses in Paradise Estates as possible, thereby gaining enough votes to control the HOA board and oust Karen. It was a real-life game of Monopoly, only instead of building hotels, John was building a suburban empire of revenge. He started by targeting the residents who were most likely to be sympathetic to his cause. The ones who had been unfairly fined by the HOA, the ones who felt stifled by the strict regulations, and the ones who simply couldn't stand Karen. He approached them with a proposition. He would buy their houses for well above market value, allowing them to escape the clutches of the HOA and start a new life somewhere less beige. Some residents were immediately on board. They had been dreaming of escaping Paradise Estates for years, and John's offer was their golden ticket. Others were more hesitant. They were afraid of Karen, afraid of the repercussions of defying her. John, however, was a master persuader. He appealed to their sense of justice, their desire for freedom, and, of course, their greed. One particularly memorable negotiation involved Mrs. Higgins, the aforementioned busybody who could hear a pin drop from 3 blocks away. Mrs. Higgins was a staunch supporter of Karen and the HOA, but she also had a weakness: antique porcelain dolls. John, being the resourceful avenger he was, tracked down a rare and valuable doll that Mrs. Higgins had been coveting for years. He presented it to her as a gesture of goodwill, and lo and behold, she suddenly became much more amenable to selling her house. As John acquired more and more properties, Karen grew increasingly desperate. She tried everything she could to stop him. She spread rumors about his financial instability, claiming that he was on the verge of bankruptcy. She organized protests outside his remaining and heavily guarded property. She even tried to sabotage his real estate deals, but John was always one step ahead of her. He used his tech startup skills to create a sophisticated data analysis system that tracked every resident's HOA violations, financial situation, and personal grudges. He knew exactly who to target and how to approach them. It was like a perfectly executed marketing campaign, only instead of selling a product, he was selling the promise of freedom from suburban tyranny. One of the most crucial acquisitions was Dave, Karen's timid sidekick. Dave, as it turned out, had been secretly resentful of Karen for years. He was tired of being her yes man, tired of being bossed around and belittled. John recognized his vulnerability and approached him with a proposition. He would buy Dave's house and give him a job working for his company, far away from the clutches of Karen. Dave, overwhelmed by the prospect of escaping Karen's reign of terror, immediately accepted. He even agreed to testify against her, providing John with valuable inside information about the HOA's inner workings. With Dave on his side, John had all the ammunition he needed to launch his final assault on the HOA. He had acquired enough properties to control the majority of the votes. He had gathered irrefutable evidence of Karen's corruption and abuse of power, and he had a team of lawyers and investigators ready to take her down. The day of the HOA meeting arrived like a storm cloud over Paradise Estates. The air was thick with tension. The meticulously manicured lawns seemed to bristle with anticipation, and even the squirrels looked like they were holding their breath. John arrived at the community clubhouse, flanked by Emily and Max, looking every bit the conquering hero. He was dressed in a power suit that screamed, "I own this town now," and his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man who was about to unleash a carefully orchestrated plan of revenge. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her helmet of hair was slightly askew, her eyes were bloodshot, and her hands trembled as she gripped the gavel. She knew that John was coming for her, and she had no idea how to stop him. The clubhouse was packed. Every resident of Paradise Estates had turned out for what promised to be the most dramatic HOA meeting in the history of suburban warfare. The atmosphere was electric, with whispers and nervous glances exchanged among the attendees. Karen called the meeting to order, her voice wavering slightly. She tried to maintain her composure, but John could see the fear in her eyes. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent shivers down her spine. The meeting began with the usual tedious updates about landscaping, parking regulations, and the ongoing debate over the acceptable shade of beige for exterior trim. John patiently waited for his moment, letting Karen lull the crowd into a false sense of security. Finally, Karen opened the floor for new business. John stood up, his voice booming through the room. "Madam President," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "I have a few matters I'd like to bring to the attention of the board." He proceeded to lay out his case, meticulously presenting the evidence he had gathered over the past few months. He revealed Karen's abuse of power, her corruption, her petty tyranny, and, of course, her arson. He presented documents, emails, and witness testimonies that painted a damning picture of Karen as a power-hungry control freak who had turned Paradise Estates into her personal fiefdom. The crowd was stunned into silence. They had always known that Karen was strict, but they had no idea just how far she had gone. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as John revealed each new piece of evidence. Karen, meanwhile, sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. She tried to interrupt, to deny the accusations, but John silenced her with a wave of his hand. "I'm not finished, Karen," he said, his voice cold and hard. "I have one more witness I'd like to call." He gestured to the back of the room, and Dave, Karen's former sidekick, nervously stepped forward. Dave, looking pale and uncomfortable, proceeded to corroborate John's accusations, providing even more damning details about Karen's misconduct. The crowd erupted in outrage. They turned on Karen, their anger and resentment bubbling to the surface. They had been manipulated and controlled for too long, and they were finally ready to take back their community. Karen, realizing that she had lost, tried one last desperate gambit. She launched into a tearful tirade, claiming that John was a liar, a bully, and a threat to the very fabric of Paradise Estates. She appealed to the residents' sense of loyalty, their fear of change, and their deep-seated love of beige. But it was too late. John had already won. The crowd had turned against her, and there was no turning back. John called for a vote to remove Karen from her position as president of the HOA. The vote was unanimous. Even the most die-hard Karen supporters voted against her, eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship. Karen, defeated and humiliated, stormed out of the clubhouse, her helmet of hair askew and her dreams of suburban domination shattered. The crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating their newfound freedom. John, basking in the glow of victory, stepped up to the podium. "My fellow residents of Paradise Estates," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Today, we have taken back our community. Today, we have overthrown the tyranny of beige. Today, we have declared our independence from the HOA." With Karen vanquished and the HOA firmly under his control, John wasted no time in transforming Paradise Estates from a beige prison into a, well, slightly less beige paradise. First, he tackled the draconian HOA regulations. He abolished the rules about lawn height, mailbox color, and seasonal decorations, replacing them with a single, simple guideline: don't be a jerk. He encouraged residents to express their individuality, to embrace their quirks, and to let their freak flags fly, within reasonable limits, of course. The results were interesting. Some residents embraced their newfound freedom with gusto, painting their houses in vibrant colors, installing quirky garden gnomes, and hosting raucous block parties that lasted until dawn. Others were more hesitant, clinging to their beige comfort zone like a security blanket. John, however, was undeterred. He organized community events designed to encourage residents to step outside their comfort zones, including a crazy lawn ornament competition, a best ugly sweater contest, and a karaoke night that featured surprisingly enthusiastic renditions of 80s power ballads. He also invested heavily in improving the community's infrastructure and amenities. He built a state-of-the-art community center, complete with a gym, a swimming pool, and a movie theater. He hired a team of landscapers to plant colorful flowers and trees throughout the neighborhood, and he even installed a herd of miniature goats in the community park, much to the delight of the children and the horror of a few remaining Karen supporters. As Paradise Estates blossomed into a vibrant and quirky community, Karen's world crumbled around her. She had been ostracized by her former friends, abandoned by her allies, and forced to move out of the neighborhood. She ended up living in a small, run-down apartment in a neighboring town, working as a cashier at a discount grocery store. John, being the magnanimous and slightly petty victor, decided to pay her a visit. He found her stocking shelves in the frozen food aisle, looking pale, tired, and utterly defeated. "Karen," he said, his voice gentle. How are you? Karen looked up, her eyes widening in shock. John? She stammered. What are you doing here? I just wanted to see how you were doing, John said, feigning concern. I heard you were having a bit of a rough time. Karen glared at him, her eyes filled with resentment. This is all your fault, she hissed. You ruined my life. I didn't ruin your life, Karen, John said. You ruined your own life. You let your obsession with control and your petty tyranny consume you. You forgot that life is supposed to be fun, not a meticulously enforced set of rules. He paused, then added with a sly smile. Besides, I think Paradise Estates is much better off without all that beige. Karen spat on the floor, then turned and walked away, leaving John standing in the frozen food aisle, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and pity. He had gotten his revenge, but it didn't feel quite as good as he had imagined. He realized that true victory wasn't about punishing his enemies. It was about building a better community. It was about creating a place where people could be themselves, where they could express their individuality, and where they could live without fear of being fined for having the wrong shade of grass. As he drove back to Paradise Estates, he couldn't help but smile. The neighborhood was buzzing with activity. Children were playing in the park, neighbors were chatting on their porches, and the sound of laughter filled the air. He had done it. He had transformed Paradise Estates from a beige prison into a true paradise. He had avenged his burnt-down mansion, overthrown the HOA, and brought freedom and quirkiness to the suburbs. And as a final, slightly absurd touch, he decided to start a consulting business, advising other victims of tyrannical HOAs on how to fight back and reclaim their communities. He called it HOA Hellraisers, and his slogan was, "Don't get mad, get even. Then, paint your house any color you damn well please."